Not since the 1950s has North Carolina witnessed such a tumultuous hurricane season. And nowhere in its history has the state experienced the kind of flooding as it did in 1999. Some call it the flood of the century. It began in late August when a tropical disturbance formed in the western Atlantic Ocean. By August 26th, the disturbance grew into a hurricane and was given a name, Dennis. Thousands of miles to the west, people living along the fragile barrier islands of North Carolina's coast began to take notice. They've been through this drill before, boarding homes and businesses, evacuating places like Ocracoke Island. Others stocked up on supplies, deciding to ride out Hurricane Dennis at home.
Not that rough.
Yeah, we stay for Category 3s. Up to 3s we'll stay.
By the 28th, Dennis was setting his sights on eastern North Carolina. He whetted the appetites of hungry surfers, trying to get in one last ride on the storm-driven swells. Winds were howling over 100 miles an hour. On a scale of 1 to 5, Dennis had now grown to a Category 2 storm. By Monday, August 30th, he began lashing the coastline, but the eye of the storm stayed just offshore. Wilmington was the first to feel the effects. Then Jacksonville, Swansboro, Emerald Isle, and Atlantic Beach. Through the night and into the next morning, Dennis battered the Outer Banks.
Howling winds made wires sing. Then came the drenching rains and surging waves. All bad signs for Topsail Island. But at daybreak, what's this? Folks ready to leave shelters? They thought things would be a lot worse.
It's our first hurricane also, and my husband is in Pensacola, and we were a little frightened to, endure a hurricane without him, so we decided to come out here.
But the biggest surprise came when neighbors got their first look at the beach. There was some erosion, but nowhere on the 26-mile barrier island did Dennis break through protective dunes. It did threaten some walkovers, some cottages, but no more than a nor'easter. This duplex on stilts and several other homes have become favorites of hurricane watchers. They use them to gauge just how severe a storm has been here on Topsail Island. But they've survived 4 major storms now: Bertha, Fran, Bonnie, and now Dennis. But many wonder if luck for these homes isn't running out. This time, damage was minor. Roofs, a window or two, screens. Folks here rushing to get things back to normal with the final summer holiday just 4 days off.
We expect a busy Labor Day. As long as the weather holds out, it's nice and sunny, the tourists will be back here. They especially like to come back right after a major storm and see what kind of damage has been done.
Yeah, but it might be a little disappointing, right?
Yeah, I think they're in for a disappointment this time.
But they'll be here anyway?
They'll be here.
When everyone thought the worst was over, the storm came to a dead stop just off Cape Hatteras. There, Dennis churned for several days, thrashing the Outer Banks, throwing wave after wave against the dunes, saturating resort towns like Nags Head and Salvo with stinging rain. Like fingers stretching to grab the brass ring, Dennis's rain bands reached far inland, pelting cities like Greenville, Kinston, and New Bern. At first, the rains came as a relief, easing the drought from the red-hot summer. Unfortunately, Dennis would prove to be too much of a good thing. Still churning off the coast, Dennis eventually weakened to a tropical storm. On September 4th, 4 days after stalling off Cape Hatteras, he made his move again, this time backtracking down the coast, then westward, coming ashore between Ocracoke Island and Cape Lookout. It was Labor Day weekend, a time when tourists should be crowding the beaches.
We had my son and his family with us, and we were cooped in 2 rooms with 3 young children under the age of 8. And it's rained and rained some more, and it's been a complete nightmare. It's been awful.
But Dennis was a total washout in more ways than one. With continuous pounding from 14-foot waves, the dunes along Highway 12 on the Outer Banks gave way.
There were 5 houses up there. There's no evidence that those houses were ever there now.
What happened to the houses?
The ocean swept them away, knocked them down, wrinkled them up like an old empty pack of cigarettes and just tossed them.
A new trench opened up between the towns of Avon and Buxton.
More than a half mile of Highway 12 is missing. It used to be on the other side of those power lines, all the way down the beach towards Buxton. The plan now, 3,000 feet of asphalt road, which will go in this way, creating a link between Buxton and the rest of Dare County.
Residents on Hatteras Island were left in the dark, completely cut off from the rest of the state. On Ocracoke Island, floodwaters washed in waist deep at high tide. It's nothing Ocracokers aren't used to, but even seasoned hurricane veterans said Dennis proved a point, that Mother Nature holds a force more powerful than anyone or anything. Further north, in places like Nags Head, Kitty Hawk, and Kill Devil Hills, highways became floodways. Seaside cottages fell victim to Dennis, unable to tolerate any more storm surge. Dennis was a very slow-moving storm when he finally came ashore. Because of that, torrential rains hammered cities and towns from Manteo to Raleigh. As much as 8 inches of rain fell in some places. Low-lying areas were hardest hit. In Pamlico County, Dennis swamped the town of Oriental not once, but twice. In Carteret County, the towns of Cedar Island and Atlantic took a heavy beating, especially to the seafood industry, with millions of dollars in damage. In Hyde County, farmers used pumps to help ease the flooding to their land. In Beaufort County, Belhaven, and Wichards Beach, residents watched the flood waters rise as they had in past hurricanes. Some were still waiting for their homes to be elevated under a federal plan following Hurricanes Bertha and Fran just 3 years ago. And in Craven County, at least 120 homes were destroyed by fast-rising floodwaters.
Broad and Front Streets in New Bern became a driver's nightmare today. Rising waters from the Neuse River quickly flooded the intersection, causing drivers to get stranded. Luckily, Carson Riggs and Nathan Morley were there to help. How long have you lived in New Bern?
Well, about a week. We live in the Riverwalk Apartments, and somebody's telling us they call it the Riverwalk Apartments because you can walk in the river on hurricane days. So.
But that wasn't the only car to get stuck. One after the other couldn't make it out without a little push. At one point, New Bern authorities had to get involved and discourage drivers from driving through the water. But not all listened to their warnings.
Yes, well, they said we could go through if we wanted to push, so.
Are you guys going to go through?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got it.
But not for long. Their truck was no match for the flooded street.
Half a dozen North Carolinians were killed during the week-long battle with Dennis, most of them in traffic accidents. When the sun finally came out again, cleanup began in earnest. Crews worked feverishly to clear tons of sand from Highway 12 along the Outer Banks and reopen the only highway along the barrier islands. Utility workers re-established downed power lines. Homes and businesses finally had a chance to dry out. Hatteras Island, however, remained isolated for several more days due to the quarter-mile-long breach in the road. Ferry service to Ocracoke resumed, but on a limited basis. Dennis had shifted the sand so badly in the Pamlico Sound that the ferries had to find new routes across the water. Meanwhile, the American Red Cross and Salvation Army began trucking in food and water to help those still stranded by high water. On the mainland, neighbor helped neighbor mop up the mud and water, tear out soaked carpeting, and repair roofs where trees had fallen. Dennis was the 4th named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season. As hurricanes go, he wasn't that intense, but the fact that he dropped anywhere from 5 to 8 inches of rain from Raleigh to the coast only set the stage for a more impending natural disaster, the likes of which most Tar Heel residents had never seen before. As Dennis was leaving the Tar Heel state, a new storm was forming off the coast of Africa. By September 10th, Hurricane Floyd was born. It was a classic hurricane, having moved all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, picking up strength each step of the way. By September 13th, Floyd had neared the Bahamas and grown into a Category 4 hurricane. Winds were now up to 155 miles an hour. North Carolina shuddered. The storm was headed this way.
We thought we had an extra day to prepare for this, so I have a feeling that a lot of these businesses are still not as prepared as they should be. But anyway, we got in today and put everything up on pallets, and I think we're going to do okay.
By the 15th of September, it was clear Hurricane Floyd would make a direct hit on the Carolinas. It was like rubbing salt on an open wound. Many eastern North Carolinians were still repairing the damage from Hurricane Dennis. Now they had to batten down the hatches once again. Farmers were still tallying up the flood damage from 2 weeks prior. Many had hoped to salvage what crops they had left. And worst of all, every inch of ground in the eastern part of the state was heavily saturated from Hurricane Dennis's torrential rains.
It's pretty rough, and it sounds like it's going to get rougher with Floyd.
If Hurricane Floyd made a direct hit, how much rain would he hold, and where would it all go? We were about to find out. Emergency management teams in counties throughout eastern Carolina moved into action. Evacuations were called from Raleigh to the Outer Banks.
Shelters are not always comfortable places, unfortunately, but they are safe places.
Red Cross shelters and churches quickly filled with anxiety-ridden residents. Grocery store shelves emptied within a matter of hours. Bottled water was in great demand. At home building supply stores, generators were the hot ticket items. Hotels and motels were booked all the way to Greensboro, with people trying to get out of the path of the storm. It seemed everyone was taking Hurricane Floyd seriously. In the hours before Floyd made landfall, he lost some of his strength. What was a Category 4 storm was now a Category 2. Still, that was no reason to let one's guard down, as eastern Carolina was about to witness. On Thursday morning, September 16th, Hurricane Floyd made up his mind. He set his sights on Oak Island, near the Cape Fear River. It was 2:30 a.m. Floyd rushed on shore with 115-mile-per-hour winds, leveling Oak Island and a number of other beach communities. But Floyd packed a more ominous element: torrents and torrents of rain. News and weather reports painted a grim picture.
It just seems like no matter where you turn, it's the floodwaters here, the floodwaters there, the beach erosion here.
The wind damage here.
Right.
Coming from all angles.
Yeah.
River basins quickly filled. Creeks rose at a phenomenal rate, overspilling their banks. Water rushed out like Niagara Falls, washing out roadways and bridges. Those caught in the rushing waters had to abandon their cars. Some never made it. In the early stages of the storm, one man tried to drive around this barricade on Highway 33 in Greenville. His car was swept away.
Somehow a male managed to get out of the vehicle and was hanging onto a guardrail on the side of the bridge. The vehicle washed over the bridge, and within a moment or so, the individual and the guardrail both were swept away by the currents.
Rescuers found the man's body more than a week later. In Jones County, a Department of Transportation worker was swept away while trying to help a stranded motorist. In Craven, Halifax, Nash, Pender, Wayne, Bertie, and Duplin counties, the story repeats itself. Stranded motorists being washed away and drowned by swollen creeks. By dawn, the tragic consequences of Hurricane Floyd were evident. Those who refused to evacuate their homes now had to swim for their lives. Daring helicopter rescues topped the national news. Water levels rose so fast and so high, barely anyone had a chance to get out with their belongings, much less their lives. Many animals never had a fighting chance. Deer and horses stood helpless as floodwaters trapped them in chest-high water. Cats, dogs, chickens, turkeys, and hogs, thousands of them, succumbed to a watery death. To understand why the waters rose so high, one need only look at the amount of rain both Hurricanes Dennis and Floyd unleashed on eastern North Carolina in a 2-week period. Along the Tar River Basin, Rocky Mount received a combined total of nearly 19 inches of rain. Greenville, 26 inches. In the city of Washington, nearly 21 inches of rain fell. Along the Neuse River, Kinston received a combined total of 21 inches of rain, as did New Bern. In Jacksonville, close to 20 inches of rain fell. The water had nowhere to go but up. Meteorologists had been warning citizens for days.
Well, what we had this season was not the winds that were a major problem with us. In fact, Floyd at one time was a Category 4 storm, but by the time it hit eastern Carolina, it had been downgraded to a Category 2 storm. Well, you would think, well, that's kind of a weak hurricane. Dennis, in fact, wasn't even labeled a hurricane when it struck the North Carolina coast the second time when it came by. It was a strong tropical storm, according to the National Hurricane Center. But what happened was we had tremendous rains because these storms brought tremendous tropical moisture with them. And it was not the wind velocity that created the problem in eastern Carolina, but it was all the rainfall that occurred. And that's what we saw this time, with areas again receiving well over 25 inches in many areas.
In the days following Hurricane Floyd, the Tar, Neuse, Roanoke, and northeast Cape Fear rivers rose dramatically. In Tarboro, the Tar River reaches flood stage at 19 feet. Following Floyd, the river rose to an estimated 43 feet. Estimated because the gauge was no longer visible with the incredible surge of water. The same with neighboring Rocky Mount. Flood stage in that city is 15 feet. It's estimated that the Tar River erupted to 34.5 feet the day after Hurricane Floyd hit. Further down the Tar River, Greenville crested at 29.74 feet. Flood stage is normally 13 feet. Along the Neuse River, flood stage at Goldsboro and Kinston is 14 feet. The Neuse rose to 28.85 and 27.71 feet, respectively, in those towns. It's easy to see why homes and businesses didn't stand a chance. In Williamston, along the Roanoke River, the water crested at 13.20 feet, 3.20 feet above flood stage. Along the northeast Cape Fear River, waters rose an astounding 10 feet above flood stage in the town of Chinkopin. The river normally hits flood stage at 13 feet. Thanks to Floyd, the waters exploded to 23.51 feet.
And essentially what caused the real Floyd problem was Dennis, because after getting hit twice by Dennis with those heavy rains, it had saturated the ground by the time we were looking at the first and second week of September. So that when Floyd came along about a week later, after Dennis hit, that is when the excessive rains that occurred with Floyd created that tremendous flooding. That water had nowhere to go because the grounds were saturated. All that water had to roll into the river. The ground could take it no longer. And when that happened, that's when the rivers flowed out of their banks and caused the most severe flooding that has ever occurred in eastern Carolina during this century.
No one could ever imagine what they were about to experience with the flooding from Hurricane Floyd. Virtually every town between Raleigh and the Outer Banks was inundated with floodwater. Eastern North Carolina had never seen anything like it. Local news broadcasts brought the enormity of the problem into our living rooms.
The images are stunning. From a vantage point 1,000 feet up, it seems everywhere you look, there's more and more Floyd. In Beaufort County, homes partially or completely submerged, more than 1,000 residents evacuated. Highway 264 also submerged by standing and flowing water, water that's 10 to 12 feet deep in some spots. The story is the same at the Pitt-Greenville Airport. Massive flooding there has partially submerged airplanes and risen high against the walls of airplane hangars. From above, it resembles a lake more than an airport. The Tar River Estates area in Greenville has also been hit hard. Here you can see a boat moving between the homes that are sticking out from an ugly brown mess. In fact, much of eastern Carolina is facing the same conditions. Folks forced from their homes or still stranded inside, waiting for the waters to finally go away. Highway 11 in Kinston is impassable in parts. Homes and businesses here, too, being accosted by the flood. The waters have risen so high here, they are almost touching the overhang on the roofs of these warehouses. Officials say there is no way of knowing when these waters will finally, mercifully go away, or worse yet, if they will rise even higher.
Never knew it would get that high. Never thought it.
Michael Townsend grew up in this home, a home now swallowed by rising floodwaters from Little Swift Creek.
We went in when it first came up inside it, and the carpet and the boards were coming up, and I think it's gone. I don't think there's no saving it.
All the houses on Streets Ferry Road are gone. Residents salvaged what they could, leaving behind cars and precious belongings.
Didn't get a chance to get anything out except some paperwork and a few pieces of clothing. All my furniture and everything's in there.
Patsy Townsend, a resident on Streets Ferry Road since 1952, didn't expect the water to get this high.
I think I'm over the initial shock. I've cried so much now until now it's, you know, only thing got left, I guess, is a sense of humor and just thank goodness we got out, or I got out. I lived by myself over there.
Patsy says she's thankful her sons and neighbors were there to help in this time of crisis. In the meantime, all she can do is wait for the floodwaters to recede.
It's gone. I can't do nothing about it, and I swear I am not going to cry anymore.
The new definition of Onslow County might be the place where the water meets the road. And no one who stopped along Gum Branch, not even longtime residents like Butch Edgar, could believe what they were seeing.
22 years.
And have you ever seen anything like this?
Not like this. I've seen it up some, but I hadn't seen it this high up.
And for him, the flooding was a travel problem in two ways. You see, he runs a body shop next door and has lost most everything in the floodwaters.
57 Chevrolet in there, the 63 convertible in there, and there's 2 Harley motorcycles, and there's a forklift, and there's a Mercury truck in there.
All your tools, all your business?
All my tools, and all that's underwater.
And it seemed that if your road was named for a waterway nearby, Gum Branch Road, Spring Drive, River Street, you had problems.
Spring Drive is flooded out. I saw a lot of people down there helping, helping each other out.
And even though David White's house was high and dry, he put his expensive boat in Gum Branch to help out neighbors like Kurt Barron. You ever seen anything like this?
This never happened before. We had Hurricane Fran, Bertha. We didn't have nothing like this. We got a lot of water this time.
A lot of water, a lot of attention from folks like this Dateline NBC crew. A lot of snakes and a lot of misery. Nothing anyone in this neighborhood would trade for a nice dry house.
It's easy to see what kind of damage the flooding has caused to homes and businesses in Wayne County. It's harder to see the damage to people's hearts.
It's up to the side window.
Morris Pate uses a stick in the ground to monitor the water level on the outskirts of his neighborhood in the Marmac community.
It's dropped from there to there.
But despite the drop, areas like Washington Park and Goldsboro are still underwater.
But you can't even see my mailbox. You can't see nothing.
Michelle and Jerome Council check their street, Carver Boulevard, every day.
It's your home, you know.
And for many people, home is where the heart is.
It breaks my heart. I've lived there 30 years and it just breaks my heart.
I came down a couple days ago and I secured everything best I could. And so I haven't been down here in 2 days. Just want to check on my business.
And the only way Kenny Brewer can see his business now is by boat. This is Main Street, Tarboro, where sandbag beaches have replaced the once dry sidewalks.
This shoe store, it got up 2 or 3 feet on their door, but they only had a couple of inches inside.
Brewer's brother-in-law, Darren Jones, says the Tar River is so swollen, it's unrecognizable.
I never imagined anything like this. I've seen the river get high before, but this is unimaginable.
Here in the neighborhoods of Tarboro, it's just as bad. Hundreds of people on this block alone have lost everything. And the longer these floodwaters linger, you can not only see the damage they're doing, you can smell it as well. This is gasoline. It slicks across the surface of these floodwaters, but it gets even worse.
I've heard that it's very contaminated with animal carcasses and because of the sewage system overflowing.
foreign triplet and her husband Ben are bracing for the worst, waiting to return to their flooded home.
Just bought it, and if it's really kaput, then we're going to be in serious trouble. I mean, we can remodel and all that, but if there's actual permanent damage, we're going to be in real trouble.
It's bad. As of 12:30 yesterday, it was up to here on me. We were trying to get the boat, and our house is on the very back in Trenner's Creek, and it's up to the windows. It's over my head in places back there.
We're expecting it to rise some more, so we feel pretty fortunate to go ahead and get out.
Yeah.
Hate to leave the house, but we want to be safe.
And these Trenner's Creek residents are not only safe, but lucky. Rescue squads from several agencies put trucks, boats, even helicopters to use as they headed into a literal sea of danger to get those people out.
It's already the worst that anyone around here can recall. We have several houses that are completely underwater.
Floyd's devastation can be easily seen from above, but officials and homeowners won't know the full extent of the damage until well after the water recedes. And that water may get even higher.
Are conditions going to get worse before they get better?
At this time, we don't know. We've gotten some information from emergency management, and we're hoping we're seeing the peak or the crest of the waters, but we can't say that for sure. These waters are coming from the western part of the state, so there's a potential for the water to rise more.
And residents like Chastity Jenkins are grateful they got out when they did, before it's too late.
Everybody was scared and crying. We were all upset. Everything is gone on the back roads, the houses. So.
The Carolina blue skies above Kinston give no indication of what lies below. This is southeast Kinston aboard a boat. To give you an idea of how bad it is here, Mayor Johnny Mosley says none of the homes you see surrounded by water flooded from the devastation of Hurricane Fran 3 years ago.
Coming out, riding through the area on a boat, the areas that we used to commute by car, is difficult to believe and comprehend on the magnitude of this flood.
Destruction so widespread, Mosley estimates 450 homes in the city are flooded, 200 more than what they saw during Fran. And it's not just homes. Business after business here on Highway 70 is flooded.
This is very devastating as far as job opportunities are concerned. However, we are hopeful that our people will not panic and start moving and leaving.
But that may happen if these businesses aren't able to reopen. Devastation for an area that already lost hundreds and hundreds of jobs this year.
I think all efforts will be made from state on down to our local officials to recruit industry.
Hard work that folks everywhere hope will pay off.
We believe that we will recover.
Cut off from the city of Snow Hill, Greene County residents are trying to get supplies any way they can.
We've been ferrying over water and supplies to this part of the county. We have cut off from the main town of Snow Hill.
Donnie Harris, Snow Hill EMS, delivers fresh water to residents still at their homes as well as in shelters. Since Hurricane Floyd hit land on Thursday, he's seen the devastation many are going through.
A lot of people are devastated, particularly down this road right here, because they didn't find out about it until the darkness, about 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning. You know, some neighbors woke up, heard frogs croaking and everything, woke them up. So that's when they started calling the other neighbors and telling them to get out.
This is a trying experience for Greene County people.
James Fulgram lives on this stretch of Highway 91 North and has been delivering water for the past few days to his neighbors.
You can make it with water. It's hard without water. People's brought in generators and neighbors help neighbor, and people's come in and help people move out, move back in. And, it's a humbling experience.
An experience no one in this county expected in their lifetime to go through.
5.5 foot, but this is also the road bed in.
That's right, 5.5 feet of Cape Fear River on the road to Charles Coombs' house. It's dropped about 2 feet, but doesn't get much better when you see his place, his neighbors, surrounded like thousands of others. Thousands who've had to fend for themselves. The mail can make it in around the roadblock. Help just hasn't come here yet.
Has anybody been down here checking on you?
No. Only they said come around and see if I was still in my house. National Guard and Red Cross, I think.
I'm just thinking about my trailer out there.
Everything's gone, and the houses all in here is all gone, and we just need some help.
Well, of course, we're in for a long haul yet. We still got a long way to go. We're in trouble in Duplin County, real trouble.
With bridges blocked, roads washed out, cars swept off them, help couldn't get here, but is now on the way. Lots of it.
And things are not moving quick enough. The water's not moving. Although the resources are getting in here, we're taking care of them. They just can't go back and get settled back into their lives yet. And that's, I think, the most frustrating thing for these people.
We need to have people to be patient, be cooperative, try to do the best they can to cooperate with their neighbor and help their neighbor, and help is on the way. We're trying to do the best we can.
Massive amounts of river water separate the shelter at Welcome Middle School from the rest of Pitt County. Food supplies have to come from anyone who can get there.
Well, it's been really tough. It's really bad for these folks. But fortunately, 903 opened up a few days ago, and Martin County, Robertsonville, Bethel, they have been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. They have been, bringing stuff in, and it's helped a lot.
Nearly 600 people are temporarily living at this shelter alone. 2 other shelters in Bethel and Stokes are full of residents as well. Here, folks get medical care, showers, and food. Even folks in the community get some relief.
There's a lot of people back here in the homes and the trailer parks that are not flooded out, but they have nothing to eat. So we've been trying to feed them and help them out.
Daphne Farmer is one of them. Her home near the airport flooded in the storm, and although she's able to stay with friends, she comes here to stock up on supplies. She admits this ordeal has not been easy.
People, if they've never been through it, they don't know. They don't even have a hint. They can't even visualize it. They just don't know until you go through it.
A lost farmer says she wouldn't wish on her worst enemy.
In Greenville, both power and water were compromised by fast-rising river water.
Greenville's main substation on Mumford Road is underwater. It's only accessible by boat.
We've been here 20-some years and we've never seen water like this, and so yes, it's very unusual.
Malcolm Green, general manager of Greenville Utilities Commission, claims crews worked all night to secure a dike around the main components. Right now, all power is coming from one unit. The other 2 have been shut off.
We have pumps in each one of them. They're running now and are making sure that any water that would filter into the berms is pumped out and not get into the equipment.
Green points out right now GUC has no plans of shutting down the substation. One unit is fully capable of supplying power to all residents.
We feel like it's manageable, and we feel like we're in a position that if waters rise another foot, 2 feet, we should be able to handle that.
Green adds most power outages in the city are not related to this situation. Those are from trees on power lines. In the meantime, he asks residents to be patient.
We got hit by probably the storm of the century, and we got a direct hit with a hurricane. This is only like day 2. Water has been a big problem for us. There's only one route, north and south, across our service area. We're having difficulty getting equipment in, people in.
While Hurricane Floyd's biggest punch may have come with the flooding inland, beach towns like Emerald Isle got a pounding that started at the surf line.
Emerald Isle's new slogan might be "Keep Looking Up," because if you look down, you don't have to look far to find all of Floyd's destruction. Especially bad here on the number streets, 1st through 25th, where the ocean literally washed under these homes and washed away all of their protection.
And that's where we have very little protective dune, and that's where we had a major overwash, ocean overwash, that just came right under those homes up there, and we just have nothing to stop that surge from coming across at that location.
And without any protection, dozens of homes here would be threatened by even the smallest winter storm, much less another hurricane. But there are 2 big problems to rebuild that dune: where to find the sand for the job, and where will they put it?
I don't think we have enough sand to beach bulldoze to offer a protective berm, but we're looking at Bogue Inlet as a source, and also Radio Island we understand as a possible source.
But either option is expensive, easily costing in the millions per mile, and something this small town will have a hard time paying for without federal help.
Nags Head along the Outer Banks also saw its share of beach erosion, as well as flooding. Getting the roads, homes, and beaches back to normal would take quite a while. The same was true for North Topsail Beach, which has been hit by hurricanes time and again. By the end of September, the floodwaters began receding in some areas. River levels were slowly dropping, but the real nightmare was just beginning. Water sat stagnant inside thousands of homes and businesses for as much as 2 weeks. The stench was unbearable. Witness the Tar River apartments in Greenville. In Kinston, the water level stayed high for more than a week, forcing well-known businesses like King's Barbecue to lose a lot of income.
The water has gone down enough to let Wilbur King inside to see what Floyd did to the restaurant his grandfather started 63 years ago.
It's a feeling of like somebody died this close to you.
Pictures of the early years are about the only things that weren't damaged. King estimates his losses so far at $300,000 to $500,000. But he's determined to reopen, so the cleanup has begun.
Upon his manpower, the cleaning could take anywhere from 2 to 3 days to 2 to 3 weeks.
And another 4 to 5 days to dry out the building.
Oh, you're still looking at about at least 2 to 3 weeks before he can even probably think about opening up his doors again.
King's isn't the only business here along Highway 70 in this kind of shape. In fact, you can see just about all of the businesses here were flooded. That's not just devastating for the businesses and their employees, but for all of Kinston.
For a town the size of Kinston, the county the size of Lenore, to lose a stretch of businesses from one intersection to the other here is tremendous.
So is the determination of many of these business owners to get back on their feet.
I think everybody's pulling for everybody. I'm certainly pulling for everybody else, and I'm sure they are me.
Business owners in Tarboro wondered when, even if, the economic pinch from Floyd would end.
The downtown area of Tarboro looked like this a week ago. Now it looks more like a town ravished by war rather than a quaint area known for its history.
It has been a long week. There hadn't been much sleep. We've been working around the clock. It is a real mess down here. We got a lot to clean up.
This is a common sight for many of the businesses downtown. Fans being used to dry the buildings out, some businesses are still underwater and having to continue to pump the water out. The town's water supply has been restored, but county officials say it's still bad water.
Although there is water under pressure, we are still told by town officials that an advisory is still in effect to boil that water, or probably easier to simply drink bottled water.
The town has been without drinkable water for more than a week. Elizabeth Parrott says she misses the normal use of water out of a tap.
You really learn to appreciate the water, to wash your hands, wash your face. You're using bottled water, and you just realize how wasteful you've been in the past.
But it's exactly like camping. You get up and your entire day is revolving around getting water.
This was the scene in downtown Windsor, reminiscent of cities and towns across eastern Carolina. People returned to what was once their home or business and found nothing salvageable. The force of Mother Nature proved taxing on the nerves and the emotional psyche of everyone affected. In fact, 66 of our state's 100 counties were declared federal disaster areas by President Bill Clinton. 2.2 million people were affected. Even churches fell victim to the storm, like the Haddocks United American Free Will Baptist Church near Ayden.
The Haddocks United American Free Will Baptist Church has faced destruction twice. Fire destroyed it in 1995, and the small congregation rebuilt it in 1997. Hurricane Floyd's torrential rains flooded it this time, but there's church today, outside. Reverend Matthew Ward saw no need to cancel today's service.
We just feel as though that we should have church because church is in our hearts, and we come to worship, and regardless of the structure of the building, church is in our hearts. And we just decided that we're just not going to give up because we had some tragedy, and we're just going to continue to worship. And if we got to do it outside, we're just going to worship.
Further south is the northeast community of Duplin County. From the outside, it looks like a town untouched by Floyd's wrath. But take a closer look.
The watermark on this house shows just how high it got here in Northeast.
And I clocked it coming in his yard from 6 to 8 inches every 15 minutes. So we only had time. We put his up on cement blocks, but when I walked out of it, I told him, I said, I don't believe we got it up high enough.
Now it looks like any piece of high, dry ground anywhere in eastern North Carolina. And it's so hard to imagine what this looked like. TV doesn't even do it justice. But from that end of Highway 41 at Chinkopin all the way to the other side of Northeast, more than 8 miles, Everything here was either in the water or underwater. It got the Ruritan Club, the store and its gas tanks, the churches, the fire department, and the homes of 23 of the 25 volunteers. Everyone here flooded out, and that is what has brought a lot of help, more on the way.
And what they need is, at this point, is not canned goods and sandwiches and that type of thing. They need money. A lot of them need some money placed in their hands.
I'm from up north, so we're not used to all this flood, so this is the first time I've ever seen something this tremendous. So it's, I feel sorry from Red Cross. I see a lot of people down there homeless and in need of a lot of people, so it makes me feel pretty good to help them out.
It's continuously working from sun up to sunset and waiting on the FEMA people. It's like they put the burden on us. We got to wait by phone, which I had to go buy a phone because I have no telephone for them to call, and you can't hardly do anything and listen to a phone, you know. And we got to wait by phone, wait for them, but they don't call.
Why so many here say they're taking the cleanup into their own hands and sorting out the paperwork later.
For days after the storm, roads remained closed, like the Highway 17 bridge between Washington and Chocowinity. Detours were the order of the day, but even then, some people were cut off completely. At Pitt County Memorial Hospital in Greenville, doctors and nurses continued providing top care to patients, even though the hospital was cut off from the surrounding area. The only way in for days was by helicopter, and that's where some folks in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, came to the rescue.
The flooding has caused many problems for residents trying to get to one place to another. Pitt County Memorial Hospital is also having difficulties getting to people with medical conditions.
There have been a couple of big problems. One, the hospital has, for the most part, continued to stay open to transfers and critical care patients, so we've had that need continue. But the other piece that's happened is that northern Pitt County has been cut off from the rest of the world.
Dr. Ritu Shani heads the East Care helicopter operation and realized delivering supplies by land would be difficult, and with only one helicopter, pretty much impossible, until this past Monday when they received another chopper. Flight paramedic Scott Sherry came on a moment's notice from Pittsburgh to Greenville.
About 2.5 hours later, we were airborne en route to North Carolina here. So it was just one of those things.
Medevac out of University of Pittsburgh is transporting patients along with East Care. A third helicopter is being used to fly supplies and physicians to shelters. This entire effort is something Dr. Shani is grateful for.
It has been tremendous. I can't express in words. I've been on the phone with their program manager and medical director pretty much daily and have said to them, you know, for the next 20 years, every time I see you guys, I'll have to say thank you.
For Scott, his thank yous will come from the people he's helped in an experience he'll always remember.
I've never done anything like this in the past, and this is something that certainly, you know, that we won't forget for a long, long time.
Area shelters were in need of medical help as well. Their calls did not go unanswered. In Pitt County, for example, 40 doctors from the ECU Medical School and private practices volunteered their services to make sure medical needs were met. As it was, they had to wade their way through deep water just to reach some of the shelters. Dr. Tom Irons, a pediatrician, helped lead the effort.
The biggest need has been the management of the chronically ill patients who have high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, and very often, more often than not, the combination of all of those things.
In the Jones County town of Trenton, many people who evacuated returned to their homes to find that they had lost everything. Cleo Kuntz helped his mother pick through possessions at her house, which had 4 to 5 feet of water inside.
I don't know, you're speechless. That is, I can't really describe it. Everything is gone.
The scenario was played out over and over again, in town after town, city after city. Residents finally coming home after more than a week of living in shelters. For many, there were no homes left. Take the town of Princeville, for example. Nearly every home in the small town was uninhabitable. Much of Princeville was left contaminated. EPA crews sopped up more than 37,000 gallons of water filled with oil and gas that had seeped out of holding tanks. In cities like Kinston, rising river water created more problems than just flooded roads.
This is Highway 70 in Kinston. But with a view from a 5-ton military truck, it looks more like an ocean. Cars are submerged. Gas pumps are underwater, as are most businesses. Boaters paddle their way through the raging waters. And the bad news is the water is still rising.
In the last 24 hours, we have probably lost 3 miles of Highway 70. 24 hours ago, we had a couple of runovers in 2 places that were maybe 100 feet wide.
On top of that, emergency officials had a potentially explosive situation to deal with here this morning.
I do know for a period this morning between 10:30 and close to 11 o'clock or to 12:30, it was closed to all traffic due to the fact that a strong smell of propane and gasoline. I do know that this is a hazardous waste nightmare. It is a catastrophe.
Not far from the floodwaters here on Highway 70 is Lenoir Community College. Right now it's home to about 250 evacuees. When they got word of the propane smell closing down this roadway to even emergency vehicles and National Guard vehicles, already frazzled nerves almost gave way to all-out panic.
We had a meeting this morning and talked to people and sort of explained to people that we're on the downside of this. I don't think that we're going to be here forever, and it is very hard when you have this many people living together.
And there may be more on the way. This morning, more people had to be evacuated from the south side of Lenoir County.
I don't think anybody really expected this water to get this high. They're in kind of a frantic mode now.
But folks at the shelter are doing all they can to calm nerves.
Settling in, becoming one big family.
A big family that may be together for a while.
The damage toll caused by Hurricane Floyd impacted more than homes, businesses, and lives. It also impacted livelihoods. In Greene County alone, the figure totals more than $36 million. Cucumber, corn, tobacco, and soybean crops were ruined. The losses to livestock were tremendous. With crops no longer available to harvest, migrant workers also found themselves out of a job.
Marta and Rejolio Rubio, along with their 5 children, were one of the many families flooded out of their homes in Wayne County. After being shuttled through 3 different shelters, they now call Greene County home.
She said that basically in Mexico, she never came across anything that like she's seen here. She said they do have some hurricanes, but nothing like what happened this time.
But thanks to Steve Davis, things are beginning to return to normal. Davis, a farm worker resource coordinator for Greene County, has been delivering food and other supplies to migrant families who've been affected by the floods.
Some of them have broke down into tears. They've been overwhelmed that they're in this country, but yet we're doing this, providing this service to them, because they can't get out and get to the areas they need to get what they need.
According to Davis, many families are not only without important supplies, they've also lost work and income. Add the language barrier to the mix, and survival becomes even harder.
What people I don't think realize sometimes is you might have one farmer that lost everything, but along with that one farmer, he could have had 400 farm workers that also lost everything.
As for Marta, she says she doesn't dwell on what's lost.
Of course, they lost everything that they had, so that's been bad. She said, but at the same time, she's thankful that all of her family is still here and everybody's safe.
And thankful for those who've reached out to her in this time of need.
Like the migrant workers, many other people in eastern Carolina were cut off from relief efforts because of the lingering high water. In Grifton, many found they had to rely on themselves and their neighbors.
This is how William Dixon Lane is getting around the city of Grifton these days. On Tuesday, William was able to see his home for the first time since the storm.
Okay, I went around to check our house and see what was happening. It's pretty bad. Took some pictures,
William has lived along Gordon and Water Street for the past 31 years, and he's never seen anything like this before.
That made me feel bad because I had seen it before on TV, but I never think I would see it here.
And that's exactly how many residents are feeling these days, especially since they still can't get to their homes. Mayor Tim Bright tells us the water has receded a lot here on Main Street, though it will be a while before people can return home.
It will be a long time before we get some of these homes back in shape to be usable. The houses will have to be inspected, and Pitt County will have to come over and check to make sure that things like wiring is okay, and then we can put juice back on in some of them.
Other homes may never be inhabitable again.
See down through here, you've got a trailer that's rolled over. It washed out the underpinning of the trailer and twisted it inside its tie downs and then brushed it against that tree.
Grifton is now in the process of finding temporary homes for their residents.
And we've got working with resources in Pitt County, and we're also working with trying to get some land with CMSD so that we can get them located in the south of the county and close to Grifton so we can provide them services they need here locally.
And help many of them rebuild their lives again.
With roads flooded, trains and buses were forced to detour around the state. Even Interstate 95 was blocked. The only mode of transportation was by boat. Even flying into or out of eastern North Carolina was impossible.
Personal things. They just didn't make it.
Jim Turcott, manager of the Pitt Greenville Airport, looks around at what used to be his office. 2 weeks ago, it and the rest of the airport terminal was under 6 feet of water.
If I tried to describe it to somebody that wasn't here, they wouldn't believe it. It's just like today where you and I are standing. We would be neck deep in water right here. And I just still cannot believe it.
Floodwaters caused an estimated $6 million worth of damage, closing the airport and stranding airline passengers like Wiley Nifon.
I think safety is the first issue, and if it's not a safe situation, then we just have to make other accommodations.
You could call it a sign of things to come. This newspaper headline from September 15th reads, "Floyd churns toward Carolinas." At the height of the flooding, this newsstand was completely submerged.
The preliminary indications are that the structure of the building is fine, but the entire interior will have to be gutted, torn out, and totally reconstructed, and I'm getting indications anywhere from 6 to 18 months.
That's why airport officials are bringing in trailers to build a modified terminal. For frequent business travelers, the sooner the airport opens, the better.
We have more trips planned in the not-so-distant future within the next few weeks, and all of those trips are planned out of the Greenville Airport, so it'll be much appreciated when it's reopened.
And officials hope that will be as soon as this Saturday.
It's like somebody kicked you in the stomach. So we'll get back.
Schools were another problem. Most initially thought they'd be closed for a day or two. That quickly turned into a week or two. East Carolina University, in an unprecedented move, shut its campus for a week and a half. Flooding had severely damaged the basements of 3 of the school's main buildings along 10th Street. Fallen trees littered the campus. Perhaps saddest of all, an 18-year-old ECU student became one of the casualties of Hurricane Floyd. Public schools in a number of counties were faced with similar problems. Floodwaters breached a number of classrooms, destroying desks, computers, and books. Even school buses were swamped in muddy water. One picture was worth 1,000 words. Rescheduling put school administrators and school boards in a bind. Some students were still housed in shelters. Some had no home to return to. Canceling the fall calendar was a real possibility for many schools, but somehow they were able to adjust. By October, many schools were ready to reopen their doors.
This bus generally goes down Highway 11 and 55. It's going to have to reroute.
Bus routing coordinator Cindy Sanderson and bus drivers in Lenoir County hit the roads today. They're trying to find out which roads are still closed, which ones washed away, and where that happened, how they're going to get kids to school on Monday. Anthony Mitchell is the transportation director for Lenoir County Schools.
We're monitoring all the roads. We have, getting the bus drivers to ride their routes and making sure that if there's any detours that they need to make, that they report back to us, and we can make sure we plot it on the map and make sure that it's safe to do so.
Getting around obstacles on the road isn't the only problem students in Lenoir County face. When they return to school Monday, it will be like starting the year all over again. And for many, because of the severe flooding, there'll be a lot of emotional issues to deal with.
Our psychologists have prepared a lot of materials and guidelines and things to help teachers and counselors to work with kids, particularly those who have experienced firsthand the flood in their homes.
In fact, there were 700 students here displaced by the floods. While most still don't have a home to go back to, heading back to school is one small step in getting life back to normal.
I know the kids are ready to go, and we're ready to get them back.
For Pitt County school administrators, it was a logistics nightmare. Many of the school children who lived north of the Tar River were still trapped by floodwaters. Meanwhile, dozens of other youngsters and their families were still living in shelters 2 weeks after the storm. Still, the schools were determined to keep the 180-day calendar.
Our major goal today was to get school back up and running. We did the 2-hour delay because there were still some questions about roads, and we wanted to give our bus drivers plenty of time to get out there and get the students picked up.
For other school systems like Edgecombe County, it was impossible to open every school building by October.
The cafeteria served pizza to an eager bunch of students at Stocks Elementary in Edgecombe County today. Students here were in good spirits, and by the looks of it, were glad to be back. But Shelley Rainey, a psychologist with the school system, says there were a few students who didn't want to come back.
We've had some kids come to us that have lost their homes. There's some fear about having them being here and having their parents at home or at work, and they're not sure exactly, all that's going on.
The entire school system faced the same ordeal today. 12 of its 14 schools opened with an hour delay. 2 of them couldn't open. The floods destroyed Princeville Montessori and Patilla Elementary. Their students will be moved to portable classrooms on grounds of other nearby schools, and their classes could resume sometime next week.
They need to know that they're in a place, with their teachers that they've gotten to know, and for their teachers to say, okay, now it's time to go to lunch. It's time. They need that structure. They really thrive on that structure.
A structure partly torn down by the floodwaters of Hurricane Floyd, some of which still remain in front of the school.
Even the ECU football team was faced with almost insurmountable odds. They were stuck in South Carolina. More than a dozen team members, including the team's quarterback, lost their apartments to the floods back in Greenville. Fittingly, their next opponent was the Miami Hurricanes. The game was supposed to be played on the Pirates' home turf, but thanks to Floyd, that wasn't possible. NC State University came to their aid and offered Carter Finley Stadium for their September 25th matchup with the Kings. The apprehension of not knowing what happened to your home and belongings never seemed to show on the faces of the Pirate football players or their coaches. They powered over Miami and won the game, giving many Eastern Carolinians that boost of spirit that they so desperately needed. In the hours, days, and weeks following Hurricane Floyd, help poured into eastern North Carolina from all over the country. The Salvation Army set up a number of makeshift kitchens across the region to meet the most immediate need of the homeless. Distribution and collection centers were also set up to help families get the most basic necessities in the hours following the floods.
Dexter Wright and dozens of other flood survivors are waiting to go shopping. Shopping for the basics.
Food, toilet tissue, water, and stuff.
Inside this vacant store, volunteers help people find what they need most. Georgia Winfrey explains this relief site is set up like any ordinary store.
We want to make this process real smooth, because you know how tough it is to ask for things when you need them.
Ravonda Randolph is finding some things so she can get back to work. She never imagined she'd need help like this.
At first, I didn't think I needed anything, but after the first couple of days of not having your own stuff to go through, and, sometimes you just got to ask for help.
From clothing to diapers, shoes to food, it's here at the relief site to help people get some normalcy back into their lives.
The American Red Cross, already busy manning evacuation shelters during the storm, set up collection and distribution centers as well. This center in Greenville was one of dozens of Red Cross service centers opened around the state. Flood victims came in droves, searching for food, clothing, money, and answers to their questions. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, set up shop in a number of towns, like Rocky Mount, to help flood victims begin the long process of putting their lives back together. FEMA offered low-interest loans to those who qualified. Cheryl and Arnold Alston, like so many other area residents, hoped FEMA would be a start.
Arnold and Cheryl Alston live in this home off Highway 97 just outside of Rocky Mount. Their home, like many others in the area, was flooded with 3 feet of water.
We lost beds, shoes, clothes, living room set, den, everything.
The two called and applied for help from FEMA the Friday after the storm. Arnold Austin says an inspector was at their home the following Monday, ready to help.
No, I didn't have to wait at all. My wife called that Thursday and took the application over the phone. We came down that Friday, and by Monday, they had made a deposit in our bank account.
Needless to say, with over 50,000 people who have applied to FEMA and to the state, it's a very difficult process to get around and have everybody done immediately.
As for the Austins, they came to the FEMA office in Rocky Mount today to finalize a loan for a new home. The couple says they hope to be settled in by the middle of the month.
Even local governments weren't immune to this disaster. Here, Kinston and Lenoir County leaders sit down with representatives from FEMA to begin the process of applying for help.
We're getting the representatives of the various municipalities, of the various emergency organizations, state, local people, all in one room there, and explain to them how they can go about seeking reimbursement.
Even FEMA Director James Lee Witt came to eastern North Carolina on several occasions in the weeks following the floods to see the devastation firsthand.
Brenda Morris of Kinston is among the hundreds and hundreds of flood victims flooding the Federal Emergency Management Agency Relief Center here.
We still can't return to our property yet, but at this point, I think I lost both of my trailers.
So she's here looking for help from the government to get back on her feet.
There's a lot of good things happening.
And today she and others here got a visit from FEMA Director James Lee Witt. He says despite any criticism, his agency is working as fast as it can and as hard as it can to provide immediate relief. But there are limits on what they can do.
People need to understand this. Our programs will not replace everything they've lost. They're not designed to do that.
Also touring the flood damage here, EPA Administrator Carol Browner. She says there's no question what happened here is an environmental nightmare. But also as she looks at what did happen, she's confident Eastern Carolina can recover.
I know it's not going to feel like it for the people here yet, but it will. I mean, it does get back here. We're going to be here. FEMA's going to be here. We're going to be working with the state until the problems are solved.
And for many, like Brenda Morris, the biggest problem is finding a place to live.
I need to get in a home that's mine, but I'm staying with some people. They're very nice, but ain't no place like home.
The effects of Hurricane Floyd were not lost on North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt. He, too, visited several areas that were wiped out by the storm. In Pitt County, he met with local leaders and toured the Emergency Operations Center. In Jones County, the governor stopped at the Civic Center in Trenton. There, he heard stories of volunteers helping out, even though their own homes were totally destroyed. But perhaps his most moving experience came at a meeting in Duplin County with local residents.
The helicopter had hardly stopped when Governor Hunt and state leaders leaped out, shook hands, and dived into a sea of questions, a sea of emotions at the Chinkapin shelter.
I want to get them to just kind of give us a little report on what is going on here now in Duplin County, and then we want to know what your needs are, what we can do to help.
And that opened up the floodgates of frustration for folks here.
You cry together and it smells so bad you don't even want to even go in there, but that's people's home. They're going back trying to salvage it.
The governor answered the questions he could, got help in Spanish and from FEMA officials. But neighbors here wanted Hunt to see and smell for himself. So they took him into town, into one home where 2 cancer patients lost everything. And it moved everyone, including the governor.
I tell him I want about 5 public health workers in this county. I will call him.
I feel a whole lot better. I mean, what else can I say? At least he's seen it firsthand. He's seen it, so maybe we'll get something out of it, hopefully.
I'm very concerned about health. I'm concerned about people coming in our homes without knowing if there is bacteria in here and not being disinfected.
Well, I tell you, I just had my heart broken again here today. I went in one home where they're both elderly people and they both have cancer. And the flooding came right up almost to your shoulders in their home. And that's what they have as a home.
A message these folks want him to take back to Raleigh.
Not long after hearing and seeing the devastation firsthand, the governor hosted President Bill Clinton and several other federal officials in the town of Tarboro. The setting? The chest-high floodwaters of the main street.
People that can't repay any kind of loans can qualify for cash assistance, and everybody can qualify we're going to try to do what we did in North Dakota, which is to get as many trailers as possible available for people to live in that can be taken to their property.
Other national public figures followed. U.S. Surgeon General David Satcher made a trip to Tarboro and Princeville, pledging to ease health concerns in the flood-ravaged areas. The Surgeon General called it one of the worst health disasters in North Carolina history.
It's very critical now to realize that the health challenges don't end when the waters recede, that they continue. So it's very important for us to communicate very clearly to people the risks that we face and to do everything we can to minimize those risks.
Martin Luther King III also made a special trip to the eastern part of the state, to Greenville and Tarboro. And the Reverend Jesse Jackson made it a point to visit several areas, including Raleigh and Rocky Mount. Aside from public figures, those who have no notoriety came out in force to show they cared. They are the unsung heroes. Sheriff's deputies, police officers, fire and rescue personnel, wildlife officers, the National Guard, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, the Marines.
The missions are winding down, but that doesn't mean the work is over for these guys. Marines from Camp Lejeune, part of Task Force Gator. It's a small unit, but one that packs a big punch, bringing a lot of relief to the folks here around Burgaw.
We commenced search and rescue operations with the local authorities, the Sheriff's Department and EMS services, to go out and help them recover people that were stranded out there, as well as people needing emergency service in areas that no other vehicle except the assault amphibian vehicle or the LAV could get to.
These Amtraks and 8-wheeled armored cars can both swim. That's a huge advantage in flooded areas, allowing these Marines to get in and rescue more than a dozen people and take needed supplies back into folks who didn't want to leave their homes.
And some, quite frankly, don't want to come out. They want to stay with their property. Unfortunately, most of what we saw out there's no property left. Water's up to rooftop levels. Cars are completely underwater. And there's a lot of people just floating around, tied up together in boats out there, and trying to maintain whatever sense of community they had.
It's a tough sight for these young Marines who only expected to see this kind of thing in a third world country, not in their own backyard.
We've let them know that we're here to help them. We don't need support. We're here to support them.
Marines from Cherry Point Air Station in Havelock also went the distance. About 50 men and women offered help to flood victims in Vanceboro. Everything from tearing down sheetrock to pulling out carpets inside homes.
What a lot of the Marines are doing today is going through, helping out some of the people remove the water-damaged equipment and belongings from their homes. Things like the carpeting, the sheetrock, things that got wet and need to be torn out so that they can begin drying the homes out so they can begin rebuilding.
Volunteers from Camp Lejeune's base forestry and camp wardens' offices helped cook up 400 fish dinners with all the fixings at the Chinkopin Fire Department in Duplin County. Many flood victims hadn't had a home-cooked meal in more than 2 weeks. Even those who had been affected by Floyd put aside their own problems to help others in need. A group of volunteers from Hyde County traveled to Greenville to feed 1,000 people a Down East barbecue dinner. If flood victims couldn't get to the food was taken to them, even by helicopter. Generosity poured out in all kinds of ways.
You don't have to go very far to find a victim of Hurricane Floyd.
I'm a flood victim, but my house didn't go under. It got, damaged, but, not in need as a lot of these other people are.
Those other people are why Connie is volunteering at the Salvation Army Distribution Center in Greenville. According to Dan Beard, a Salvation Army official, no volunteers means no help for those in need.
Without the volunteers, this warehouse can't function. We're not able to meet the needs of these people. The volunteers are vital to make this thing happen.
The Salvation Army's operation here in Greenville could be hampered if they don't have enough volunteers. Now, for those who depend on their services, that means getting essential items like clothing and food could take a lot longer.
We simply can't get the items out on the table to them.
Steve Hudson, an organizer of this center in Greenville, explains what the volunteers mean to their operation.
We are a mission, but at the same time, the concept is the whole community is the Salvation Army, and we can only do what the community allows us to do, and that's through volunteerism.
Connie Taylor will tell you just how easy it is to give a little time.
all you had to do is just come in and sign up and ask, can they help, and we'll put you to work.
Help began arriving from across the state and across the nation. In Greenville, the Western Carolina University Marching Band rolled into town with an 18-wheeler loaded down with food, baby items, and cleaning supplies. Band members also presented a check to the East Carolina University Relief Fund to help students affected by the storm. Volunteers with Samaritan's Purse helped tackle the dirty work of tearing out moldy drywall and carpeting in flooded homes and start building anew. Nearly 2 months after the floods, the volunteers were still hard at work. Other groups of volunteers came from areas familiar with hurricanes.
They've traveled more than 800 miles to help flood victims here in North Carolina. These hurricane helpers from Panama City used the local media to rally for donations.
The Island 106 radio station and Channel 7 TV station got together and started a Hurricane Helpers.
Be a hurricane helper! Right! If anyone should know what it's like to live through a hurricane, it would be these Floridian volunteers who were also threatened by Floyd and spared.
After the hurricane came in here and did miss us, our area also gets hurricanes, and we know how devastating it is for the families and how much they need this and that and everything else.
So they asked people to bring toys, canned goods, bedding materials, anything and everything hurricane survivors would need. Then they hit the road to North Carolina. Now, 18 hours later, volunteers arrived to New Bern.
For the most part, it is a long, tiring ride in trucks that are bouncing, but we basically enjoyed ourselves.
Despite the reason they had to make this trip and see the devastation Floyd left in North Carolina.
Virtually every school system in Eastern Carolina fell victim to Floyd's floods. Classes were canceled for several weeks in some areas. Some schools would never open again. Books, computers, desks, chairs, backpacks, even lockers full of memories were wiped out in an instant. Other schools heard the pleas for help and reached out. Student council members from Swansboro Middle School carted boxfuls of textbooks, backpacks, and pencils to C.M. Epps Middle School in Greenville. Students say they were compelled to do something.
It's like a warm fuzzy. You know that other kids out there are in need, and it makes you realize how fortunate you are.
And this sight nearly took people's breath away. 500 Harley riders arriving in Nash and Edgecombe counties to rev up the spirits of those so down on their luck. The riders drove around to find out what supplies were needed, then picked up the items and donated them to the Red Cross. For one afternoon in October, television and radio personalities came together in Greenville to help raise money for the governor's Hurricane Floyd Relief Fund. Stations from across the state donated the airtime. DJs, news anchors, weather and sports personalities all volunteered their time to help raise over $2 million for the victims of Hurricane Floyd. Donations will help many victims get back on their feet. But the one recurring theme you hear throughout Eastern Carolina is faith. To that extent, area churches played a very large part in the recovery effort. Lots of people are leaning on their church family for support, and many of them are getting it from every denomination. Local Carpenters for Christ, with hammers in hand, jumped right in to help flood victims rebuild in Pollocksville and surrounding cities and towns.
That's our primary concern right now, is to get the houses cleaned and disinfected so they can be put back together and get people back in their homes.
In Washington, the snowed Church of God has only 75 members, but the congregation managed to pass out thousands of cans of fruits and vegetables and serve up meals to those in need.
When you start giving, you receive so much more because, you know, when you see the joy that it does to them, and it just brings it back upon you that you're able to help them in some small way.
Even congregation members who lost their own homes still came out to volunteer their time. Perhaps one of the hardest tasks in aiding the storm victims was locating caskets of loved ones that were unearthed in the floodwaters. In the town of Princeville, it was an enormous effort.
Burying a family member is never an easy task. Today, some of that pain resurfaced as Princeville started the long, hard task of returning uprooted caskets to the ground.
We have 17 scheduled to be buried today, and then we will continue to bury until the final ones are placed in the cemetery here.
Buddy Bell is with the National DMORT team. They specialize in returning caskets to the ground after floods or other disasters unearth them. He says there are 163 caskets, 163 of the town's friends and family that need reburial here in Princeville. One of those caskets holds the former mayor of Princeville, Carolyn Powell, the mother of this woman, Evelyn Staten.
And we thought, well, she just had to get up to see what was going on.
She says she's glad her mother's casket was identified and returned to its resting place.
It's just a closure, another closure. I don't have any depression or anything like that. I'm glad it's coming to a close.
It's easy to see that help will be needed in eastern North Carolina for months, even years to come. While the enormity of the problem fades from the headlines and people across the country go about their daily routines, nothing will be routine for the thousands of flood refugees still trying to piece their lives back together. Not for a long, long time.
There are refugees among us that are not from the foreign shores, and the battles they've been waging are from very private wars. And there are no correspondents documenting all their grief, but these refugees among us all are yearning for relief.
Because I know the trailer's underwater right now, and everything is in there, my clothes, my furniture, my kids' clothes, everything.
There are refugees among us. They don't carry flags or signs. They are standing right beside us in the market checkout lines. And the war that they've been fighting, it will not be televised, but the story of their need for love is written in their eyes. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors of the heart. I've been there 30 years and it just breaks my heart.
Well, I really need somewhere to live, because now we're flooded out, the home is underwater.
Can you see through their disguises? Can you hear what words won't tell? Some are losing faith in heaven, 'cause their life's a living hell. Is there anyone to help those who have nowhere else to flee? For the only arms protecting them belong to you and me. This is a call to arms, to reach out and to hold the evacuees from the dark. This is a call to arms, to lead anguished souls to safe harbors of the heart. Can you feel the pleas of the refugees for safe harbors of the heart?
I mean, you stand and look at a house, and you say, well, there's no way water can go that high, but it does.
It's rather hard to think everything you have is, damaged.
Got all the paint scraped in there. Got all the walls washed.
That maybe everything will be all right.
until you experience, you will never know just the emptiness. You just feel like you don't have nothing, and you don't have nothing.
It's hard to sleep at night thinking about how close I come to losing my wife that's pregnant and little sister, stepfather, and my mother.
We are not going to leave these people hopeless and helpless, but we need help. This is more than we ever imagined. This is a 125-year flood, and it has devastated us. We need help. We're going to come back, but please help us.
Safe harbors of the heart.
Once the news cameras start rolling, once the story been told a dozen times and you're tired of hearing it, please don't forget us.